Welcome to HFY Fiction Journey. In today's story, we'll explore a fun encounter between an alien girl and a human. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more exciting sci-fi tales. The metallic hum of the starship's engine reverberated through the cabin, a constant reminder of the vast emptiness of space. Earth's sun had long disappeared. Now just a distant memory, and the view outside the ship's windows was nothing more than an endless field of stars. Captain Eric Dalton reclined in the pilot's chair, his eyes half closed. His ship, the Resolute, was on autopilot, navigating the jump to the Galactic Council's headquarters, where the next stage of his mission awaited. Eric wasn't alone on this trip. At his feet sprawled his German shepherd. Max was not just a pet. He was a partner and a loyal friend who had been with Eric through every twist of fate since his days back on Earth. Even in the cold, sterile environment of deep space, Max's warmth and presence made things feel a little more like home. Max's large brown eyes fluttered open as a soft ping echoed through the cabin, a signal from the ship's proximity alert system. Eric snapped to attention, his hand immediately reaching for the controls. "What is it, buddy?" Eric muttered as Max's ears perked up. The ship's sensors indicated a small craft approaching from the starboard side. It wasn't unusual out here in the lawless regions of space, but caution was always the best policy. Eric keyed in the ship's comms and brought up the external cameras. The approaching craft was sleek and metallic, clearly alien in design, but not one he recognized from any of the major galactic factions. It was smaller than the Resolute, but designed for speed rather than combat. Before Eric could send a hail, the incoming ship's comm crackled to life. A soft, melodic voice filled the cabin. "Attention, unidentified Terran vessel. We request permission to dock. We seek assistance." Eric raised an eyebrow. It wasn't often that someone out here requested help so directly. Max tilted his head, his tail thumping once against the floor. "Well, Max, looks like we've got company." The docking clamps hissed as the small alien craft latched onto the Resolute's side, and the airlock began its pressurization cycle. Eric stood by the door, Max at his side, his hand hovering near his sidearm. He preferred to solve things without violence. In the depths of space, trust was a rare commodity. The airlock hissed open, and the first thing Eric saw was a young woman, unmistakably alien in appearance. Her skin was a deep shade of violet, smooth and glowing faintly under the ship's artificial lights. Her large, almond-shaped eyes shimmered silver, and her black hair flowed in intricate patterns down her back. She wore a form-fitting suit of silvery material that glimmered like water. Though she was tall, her posture was uncertain, almost hesitant. Eric held up a hand in greeting, trying his best to appear non-threatening. "Welcome aboard the Resolute. My name's Eric Dalton. What's the troubles?" The alien girl blinked, her gaze flicking from Eric to Max. Her silver eyes widened in alarm, and she took a step back, her hands trembling as she pointed directly at Max. "By the stars, what is that monster?" Eric looked down at Max, who was sitting obediently at his side, tongue lolling out in a friendly pant. He couldn't help but chuckle. "That's just my dog." The alien girl's initial terror seemed to subside as she processed Eric's words, though her eyes remained fixed on Max, wide with disbelief. "Dog." She repeated the word dog, strange and unfamiliar in her melodic accent. Taking a cautious step forward, her hand gripped a small metallic device at her belt, a weapon, perhaps, or some kind of defensive tool. "On my world, creatures like this are monsters from our nightmares, beasts of legend." Eric knelt beside Max, scratching the dog behind his ears. "On Earth, he's just a regular old dog, the best friend you could ask for." Max, sensing the alien's unease, gave a friendly bark and wagged his tail. The girl flinched at the sound but didn't retreat further. Eric stood, extending a hand toward her. "So, what's your name?" She hesitated for a moment, clearly unsure whether to trust him. Finally, she responded, "I am Aara of the Naren people." "Naren? Can't say I've met one of your kind before. What brings you out to this corner of the galaxy? Aara's gaze shifted toward the floor, her expression darkening. I am in trouble. My ship was attacked by mercenaries while I was en route to the Galactic Council. They disabled my engines, and I barely managed to escape. I detected your ship nearby and I hoped you might help me. Eric frowned. Space was full of dangers, but mercenaries targeting a Naren vessel was bold. The Narens were known for their diplomacy and trade influence throughout the galaxy. Hardly the kind of people you wanted to make enemies of. You've come to the right place, Eric said. I'll take a look at your ship and see what I can do. You can stay aboard the Resolute until we figure it out. Aara's eyes softened with gratitude, though they still flickered nervously toward Max every few seconds. Thank you. But about your dog. Eric chuckled again. Don't worry. He won't bite. Max here has more sense than most folks I've met. He's friendly. Max, sensing the opportunity to prove his worth, padded forward and sat directly in front of Aara, looking up at her with his big brown eyes. His tail swished across the floor like a broom. Aara froze, her body tensing as the dog stared at her. But Max didn't move. He simply waited, his tongue hanging out in that silly, happy way that only dogs could manage. Eric gave her an encouraging nod. Go ahead, pet him. You'll see. Aara swallowed hard, extending a trembling hand toward Max. She hesitated for a moment, then touched his head lightly. Max immediately leaned into her hand, his tail wagging faster. Aara's eyes widened in surprise. It's soft. See? He's not a monster, just a big softy. Aara's expression shifted from fear to something close to awe. She knelt down more confidently this time and stroked Max's fur, her violet fingers moving through his thick coat. Max, for his part, was enjoying the attention immensely. Aara looked up at Eric, her silver eyes bright with wonder. I have never encountered a creature like this. I was told that Earth's predators were dangerous, but he is unlike anything I have seen. Eric grinned. Yeah, dogs are something special. But let's get back to your ship. I'll check the damage and see if we can get you back on your way. The two of them, along with Max who followed closely behind, made their way to the docking bay where Aara's craft was attached. It was a sleek, streamlined vessel, clearly designed for speed and stealth, but it was in bad shape. Its hull was scorched in several sections, visibly damaged from weapons fire. Eric whistled as he surveyed the wreckage. Looks like they really did a number on your ship. Aara stood beside him, her expression tense.
I was on a diplomatic mission carrying sensitive information. I believe the mercenaries were hired to intercept me and steal the data. That explains why they were so aggressive, Eric muttered. Let's take a look at your engine core. If it's just a matter of repairs, we can get you back up and running. The two of them worked together, with Eric examining the ship systems and Aara guiding him through the more complex aspects of Naren technology. Max stayed close, wandering the docking bay, but always keeping an eye on Aara, who had slowly grown more comfortable with his presence. As the hours passed, Eric began to see the extent of the damage. The engines had been severely compromised, and several key systems were completely offline. It would take more than just a patch job to get the ship spaceworthy again. Well, Eric said, wiping his hands on a rag, the good news is we can fix this. The bad news is it's going to take a while. Aara frowned. How long? Depends. If I can source some parts from the Galactic Council when we arrive, maybe a few days. But until then, you're stuck with us. Aara glanced at Max, who was lounging lazily by the docking bay entrance. I suppose that is not the worst fate. Eric smiled. Trust me, once you get used to him, Max grows on you. That night, the three of them gathered in the ship's common area. Eric had prepared a simple meal, rations and rehydrated food. Nothing glamorous, but enough to keep them going. Aara sat across from him at the small table, her posture more relaxed now that she'd had some time to adjust to her strange new environment. So, you mentioned you were on a diplomatic mission, Eric said, taking a bite of his food. Mind telling me more about what you were carrying? Aara hesitated for a moment, then sighed. I suppose there's no point in hiding it now. I was transporting classified information, evidence of a plot within the Galactic Council to undermine several trade agreements. If this information were to fall into the wrong hands, it could destabilize entire sectors of the galaxy. Eric leaned back in his chair, frowning. Sounds like you've got a target on your back. Yes, she said softly, and I believe those mercenaries will not stop until they have what they seek. Eric glanced at Max, who was dozing peacefully at their feet. Well, you've got me and Max here. We'll keep you safe until we can figure something out. Aara smiled, though it was tinged with worry. Thank you, Eric, but I fear that protecting me may put you in danger as well. Danger is nothing new to me, Eric said, flashing a reassuring grin. Besides, Max here is a pretty good judge of character. If he trusts you, then I trust you. Max stirred at the sound of his name, yawning and stretching out his legs before resuming his nap. Aara glanced down at him, her silver eyes soft with a mixture of amusement and affection. You Terrans are strange. On my world, a creature like that would be feared. Yet here he is, your protector. Eric chuckled. Yeah, well, Earth's a strange place. But we've got a saying, a dog is man's best friend. Max has been with me through thick and thin, and I've never met anyone more loyal. Aara seemed to ponder this for a moment, her gaze distant. Then she looked at Eric, her expression serious. I've been alone for a long time, traveling through the stars without companions or friends. Perhaps it is time I learned from your example. Eric raised an eyebrow. You saying you want to stay with us for now? She replied, a small smile tugging at her lips, until we reach the Galactic Council. Eric grinned. Sounds like a plan. Welcome to the crew, Aara. The days passed quickly as they worked on repairing Aara's ship. Eric and Aara fell into an easy routine, sharing meals and stories about their respective worlds while Max kept them company with his ever-present loyalty. Aara had grown increasingly fond of Max, and though she had been terrified of him at first, she now found his presence comforting. There was something about the way Max always seemed to know when she was feeling uncertain, resting his head on her lap or nuzzling her hand, that made the vast emptiness of space feel less lonely. As they neared the Galactic Council's headquarters, the weight of Aara's mission began to press down on them all. Eric sat at the controls, gazing out at the massive gleaming station that hovered in the distance. It was a sprawling structure of glass and steel, where representatives from every corner of the galaxy gathered. It was a place of diplomacy, but also a place of secrets and schemes. Aara stood beside him, her expression tense. I will need to make my report as soon as we dock. The council must be informed of the plot. Eric nodded. I'll stay close. If those mercenaries show up again, they'll have to go through me and Max. Aara smiled, though her worry remained. I know you will protect me, but I fear this is far bigger than any of us. As the Resolute docked at the Galactic Council, the trio disembarked, stepping into the grand halls of the station. Aara walked ahead, her mission clear in her mind, but Eric and Max stayed close behind. They didn't have to wait long before trouble arrived. A group of armed mercenaries, their faces hidden behind metallic masks, appeared from the shadows of the station's corridors. Eric cursed under his breath, drawing his blaster and stepping in front of Aara. Looks like they tracked us down, he muttered. Max growled, his stance tense as he positioned himself between the mercenaries and Aara. The mercenaries eyed the dog warily, clearly unfamiliar with the creature, but not willing to take any chances. One of them, a tall figure with a voice modulator that crackled like static, stepped forward. Give us the Naren. We don't want to fight. Eric smirked. I'm afraid you're going to get one anyway. The mercenaries raised their weapons, but before they could fire, Max lunged forward with a speed and ferocity that took them by surprise. His teeth bared, he leaped at the nearest mercenary, knocking him to the ground with a powerful blow. The others hesitated, their guns wavering as they faced the snarling beast. Eric took the opportunity to fire his blaster, taking out two more before they could react. Chaos erupted in the corridor, but Max was everywhere, darting between the mercenaries and disarming them with quick bites to their arms and legs. His sheer size and strength made him a force to be reckoned with, and within moments, The remaining mercenaries were either incapacitated or fleeing in terror. Eric stood back, breathing heavily as the last of the mercenaries limped away. Max returned to his side, panting. Max, unharmed and tail wagging proudly, stood by Eric's side. Aara stared in awe, her eyes wide as she took in the scene. Your dog, he truly is a protector. Eric chuckled, scratching Max behind the ears. I told you, best friend you could ask for. Aara smiled, her fear finally easing as she looked at the dog that had saved her life. Thank you, Max. Max barked in response, as if understanding her gratitude.
A tense silence settled over the grand corridor of the Galactic Council Station. The remains of the brief but chaotic battle lay scattered on the polished floor. Blaster burns scorched the walls. Weapons lay discarded, and the unconscious forms of the mercenaries still twitched occasionally from the shock of defeat. Eric holstered his blaster, scanning the area for any signs of backup. The mercenaries had retreated, but he wasn't about to let his guard down yet. Max, ever alert, stood at his side, still growling softly at the retreating figures. Max down, Eric said, his voice steady. With a final huff, Max sat down but kept his gaze locked on the corridor ahead, his ears twitching as if waiting for more trouble. Aara, still catching her breath, placed a hand on Max's head, her violet skin trembling slightly. That was impressive. I didn't know Earth creatures were so fierce. Max has seen his fair share of action, Eric said with a slight smile. More than I'd like sometimes. Aara's silver eyes darted to the corners of the corridor, scanning for any sign of more mercenaries. We need to keep moving, she said, her tone sharper now, urgency replacing the moment of wonder. They know I'm here. It's only a matter of time before more of them come. Eric nodded, his expression darkening. What exactly is in that information you're carrying? Why are they so desperate to stop you? Aara swallowed. Looking away for a moment, she glanced down the empty corridor, making sure they weren't being overheard. It's more than just trade agreements. The data I have exposes high-ranking members of the Galactic Council involved in a vast conspiracy. They've been sabotaging diplomatic talks between species, setting up conflicts to destabilize sectors, all while profiting from the chaos. Eric let out a low whistle. No wonder they're throwing everything at you. I didn't know how deep it went until now. Aara admitted, her voice tight with fear. If I don't deliver this data to the Council, they'll cover their tracks and countless worlds will be torn apart by war. Eric considered their options. The Galactic Council Station was supposed to be a place of diplomacy and safety, but if high-ranking officials were involved in this conspiracy, they couldn't trust anyone inside. They needed to find a way to deliver the information directly to someone who would act, someone who could protect Aara and expose the conspiracy without being silenced. We'll need a direct route to someone trustworthy on the Council, Eric said, his mind racing. Do you have any allies here? Aara hesitated, then nodded. There's one, Counselor Devik. He's been a supporter of Naren diplomacy for years. I believe he would help, but we have to be careful. If they suspect him of being involved, they'll move to eliminate him too. All right, Eric said. We'll need to reach him before they get to us. Max let out a low growl, and both Eric and Aara turned their heads to see movement at the far end of the corridor. More figures were approaching, their footsteps echoing through the hall. These ones were armored, their weapons drawn. Looks like they're not done yet, Eric muttered. Time to move. They sprinted through the grand corridors of the station, their footsteps echoing off the walls as they raced toward the council chambers. Max stayed close to Aara, his head swiveling at every noise, every shadow, ready to defend her at a moment's notice. Eric led the way, weaving through the station's labyrinthine halls. He had been to the Galactic Council before. His work as a freelance pilot had brought him to various parts of the galaxy, and he knew his way around these diplomatic stations. But this time, the stakes were higher than ever. As they turned a corner, they found themselves in the heart of the station. A sprawling central plaza filled with towering statues, cascading water features, and representatives from dozens of species moving about their diplomatic business. The contrast between the chaos they had just fled and the peaceful scene ahead was jarring. "We need to stay low," Eric whispered, pulling Aara into the shadows near one of the statues. "If they see us out here, it's game over." Aara's eyes darted nervously across the plaza. "We're close. Counselor Devick's office is in the east wing," Eric said, nodding. But before they could move again, Max's ears perked up and he let out a low, warning growl. Eric followed Max's gaze and saw a group of mercenaries entering the plaza from the opposite side, their eyes scanning the crowd. "We don't have time to be subtle," Eric said, grimacing. "Max, stay with Aara. I'll create a distraction." Before Aara could protest, Eric darted out of the shadows, moving swiftly toward the fountain at the center of the plaza. He vaulted over the edge, landing in the water with a splash that immediately drew the attention of the mercenaries. "Hey!" Eric shouted, waving his arms. "Looking for me." The mercenaries turned as one, their weapons rising, and without hesitation, they charged toward him. Eric grinned, knowing he had bought Aara and Max a few precious seconds. He ducked behind the fountain as the first blaster shot sizzled past his ear, splashing into the water. He fired back, keeping low as the mercenaries advanced. The plaza erupted into chaos, diplomats and traders scattering in all directions as the sound of gunfire echoed through the grand hall. Meanwhile, Aara crouched in the shadows, her heart pounding in her chest. She glanced down at Max, who was waiting patiently at her side, his gaze locked on Eric and the mercenaries. For a moment, she hesitated. Should she run and leave Eric to handle the mercenaries alone, or should she try to help him? Max gave a soft whine, as if sensing her indecision. Aara looked into his deep brown eyes and found an unexpected sense of calm there. She had never known a creature like him, so loyal, so fearless. Yet she realized Max wasn't just waiting for Eric to return. He was waiting for her decision. "We go," Aara whispered, her voice barely audible. "Stay close." With Max at her side, Aara slipped through the crowd, moving as quickly and quietly as she could. They wove between the panicked diplomats and traders, avoiding the mercenaries who were still focused on Eric. She could hear the gunfire in the distance, but she didn't stop. They had to reach Counselor Devick. Aara and Max finally reached the east wing, the grand doors of Counselor Devick's office looming ahead. She hesitated for only a moment, then pressed her hand to the control panel. The doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a large, ornately decorated office bathed in the golden light of the station's artificial sun. Counselor Devick stood by the large window overlooking the station, his tall, elegant form silhouetted against the light. He turned as Aara entered, his eyes widening in surprise. "Aara," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "What are you doing here? I thought your mission—" "It's been compromised," she interrupted, her voice urgent. "The mercenaries are after me. I have the data, but we need to act quickly. There's a conspiracy within the council, and they're trying to stop me from exposing it." Devick's expression darkened.